By default, most PaaS services in Azure are deployed with public endpoints. The moment a service is exposed publicly, it becomes a potential security risk. From a security engineering standpoint, this is a red flag because the service can now be accessed from the internet, making it harder to monitor and control effectively. Public endpoints can be exploited for attacks or even data exfiltration if not properly configured. As a security engineer, your role is to ensure these services are not accessible over the public internet. In this video, we will walk through the key configurations you should review and implement to restrict PaaS services to your private network, which will reduce exposure and improve overall security posture. Let's say you have deployed a storage account, which is a typical PaaS service in Azure. By default, if you don't configure any networking settings, it will be exposed through a public endpoint. And this makes it accessible over the internet. You can view the various public endpoints by navigating to the Endpoints option under the Settings section of your storage account. As a security engineer, the first thing you should do is navigate to the Networking section of the storage account settings. This is where you will find the current network access configurations. In this example, we can see that public network access is enabled for the storage account. This is a potential security concern as it allows unrestricted access over the internet. To secure it, you can disable public access entirely by selecting the disabled option. However, before doing that, it's important to understand the second option as well, which is enabled from selected virtual networks and IP addresses. This setting offers a more secure and flexible approach by allowing access only from approved virtual networks or specific IP ranges, which can give you tighter control while still maintaining necessary connectivity. But before selecting it, let's get onto the virtual network and enable the service endpoints for the storage account, which is what needed in this particular case to choose that second option. In this virtual network, you will notice there are three subnets. For this example, let's assume we want the data subnet to communicate privately with the storage account. To begin, click on the data subnet to configure the necessary settings for secure private connectivity. Slide out appears on the right hand side. Click on the drop-down list under the Service Endpoints section. Notice the number of Azure services that support service endpoints. It's important to point out that only a limited set of Azure services support service endpoints. A common misconception is that service endpoints are available for all Azure services, but that is not the case. Always check service compatibility before planning your network architecture. Let me select Microsoft Storage from the list. Click on Save. And now Data Subnet has a service endpoint added for the Microsoft Storage. Now let me go back to the networking section of the storage account and add this subnet there. Select the option called Enable from selected virtual networks and IP addresses, and then add the virtual network with the subnet. In case you selected the subnet which is not enabled for service endpoint, it shows you the message indicating that subnet is not enabled for service endpoint. Click Save, and at least now your storage account can talk to one specific network in your environment. This is one way to secure your storage account. Let's select the Disabled option now from the Public Network Access section and then click on Private Endpoint Connections. Click on Private Endpoint. Fill in the details such as resource group and name of the private endpoint. Click Next. Select the sub-resource for which you want to create a private endpoint. In this example, I am selecting Blob. But as you see, you have to create the private endpoint for each sub-resource when it comes to storage accounts. For some Azure resources, there are multiple sub-resources. and for some just one. So this depends on the resource for which you are creating a private endpoint. Select the virtual network and subnet for the private endpoint and click next. Select the private DNS zones. This is very critical step. Ensure that it is integrated rightly with the private DNS zones. Note, for services supporting private endpoints, there is a private DNS zone that you need to create. You might use centralized private zones for this purpose in your environment. Click on tags and then review plus create. Private endpoint is added and the storage account will now be accessible within the private networks only. So key learning as a security engineer is to ensure that either you see service endpoints or private endpoints on the services. Private endpoints are recommended way to access the Azure PaaS resources that comes with the private endpoint capability. Another way to restrict access to the storage account is through the resource firewall as shown. This is applicable in a scenario where you select the second option. Usually in this case, design pattern could be that you control the all outbound through the centralized firewall or proxy in your organization. And that could be either your proxy server IP or firewall IP. For app services and Azure function, you have the option to integrate with a virtual network. But it's important to note that this integration supports outbound traffic only. You should use VNet integration to manage outbound connections securely and private endpoints for securing inbound traffic. When both options are available, they should be your first choice in your security strategy to maintain isolation and control. In this example, the web app has VNet integration enabled, which means outbound traffic from the app can reach into your virtual network. By default, Azure Virtual Network integration for app services does not route traffic through a firewall or network virtual appliance. However, you can force the outbound traffic through a firewall, but there are important considerations, such as to force outbound traffic from app service via VNet integration through Azure Firewall, you must ensure you are using regional VNet integration. This only works for standard or higher app service plans. Your virtual network must be in the same region as the app service. You must also associate the subnet used for VNet integration with a route table and add a default route in the UDR pointing to the Azure Firewall or NVM. This forces all outbound traffic from the app service through the firewall. Overall, Azure provides a rich set of security construct that you can leverage to protect your workloads. These include service endpoints, private endpoints, resource firewalls, VNet integration, and even deploying services directly into your virtual network, like the app service environment and Azure SQL Managed Instance. I hope this quick walkthrough gave you a clear understanding of these essential tools and how you can use them to strengthen the security posture of your Azure workloads.